Okay. Should be good if I'm standing kind of like this. All right. So today I'm going to talk to you about stage managing. What comes to mind when you hear that, or what's your background going into that about what you know about it?
The director's saying action. That's about it.
Not exactly. That's not exactly what a stage manager does. So stage managers are the people who kind of manage all the nitty gritty that the directors don't want to do, and also keep an equilibrium going in rehearsals to make sure that like actors stay focused and directors stay focused. And they also are kind of like administrative assistants in the sense where they develop and curate paperwork that's sent out to the actors that directors can kind of look at, like before auditions, during rehearsals, and then during performances. Do you want to see an example of like one of the forms that could maybe be used for like during auditions?
Sure.
Okay, so here's an example of a form that I used just this past spring that's like for a musical in the sense. So like as I'm scrolling, what kind of questions is it prompting up for you?
Well, are they familiar with those kinds of musicals, maybe?
Yeah, so sometimes directors will put that on the audition form to see if like actors have a familiarity with the song and or play, because if they do, then they might be choosing a piece from that, or if the actor is picturing themselves in a certain role, then the director might take that into consideration before the director would maybe choose one of their own roles. But ultimately it's director's choice to what the people get cast as, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What other questions does it kind of prompt up for you, like looking at this?
All right, go back a second.
Yeah.
That's probably just being weird, but can male actors play female parts and female actors play male parts in certain kinds of productions?
In certain productions, yeah, and a lot of theater / educational theater and even professional theater is moving towards the realms of having non-binary casting, so people can play either gender that either what they identify with or one that they feel more comfortable portraying, kind of thing. It's to make the more inclusion factor and also steer away from the stereotypes of a lot of female actors had the premise based on they needed a certain bust size for certain characters or a certain vocal range, and male characters needed to be more muscular and also have a certain vocal range.
Yeah.
But a lot of people can cross over into either vocal range, whether they're transgender or non-binary, or even if they just identify in a different gender than what they chromosomally present as.
Okay.
What else did it kind of prompt up for you?
Experience. How much experience do they have to be in one of the productions?
That can kind of vary. Sometimes you don't need any experience. Sometimes you need a decent amount of experience, but usually that's kind of pre-stated to like what they're looking for. If it's like equity versus like not equity, if it's equity, you probably have some experience because you needed to get the equity card. But if it's not equity, they'll usually do like open casting call to kind of figure out like what role you might be good for and if they ultimately decide to cast you, kind of thing.
Do they have to have a certain number of roles in high school in order to be picked to do a role in college?
Usually not. There's a lot of people who come into college and just do theater for the first time and have never done it before.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people who just do it in high school and then don't do it again afterwards.
All right.
So, what is one more question you think you might have with this?
What's with the hours and the schedule?
Yeah.
How does that fall together or fall apart?
So with the hours and the schedule, this can fall together or fall apart by all of the actors mark their occurring conflicts, like put an X through it. It's just to know like when they can't come to rehearsal, so they're not called when they're busy, or like especially in a collegiate setting, like if they have a class, like you don't want them missing class.
Right.
So sometimes people might have class from like 9 to 1 on a Thursday, but only like 11 to 2 on a Tuesday, so it can kind of vary. Just like people sometimes might have a one-time conflict kind of thing, but all of this stuff on this form here can be curated into this kind of template, which is like a Microsoft Excel or a Google spreadsheet.
Okay.
And you can make all this form info correlate into these things. So the director doesn't necessarily need to look at this form. they can just look at this and be like, these are everybody who's auditioned, and then sometimes they'll highlight the boxes of who they've auditioned.
Okay.
This is an example of a sheet I used, but I took the names out, so the names that were highlighted was ultimately who was cast. And then looking at this, you can correlate that in a few different ways. For this production I just got done with, we highlighted the schedule and we gave each person a different color. So like you can see on like Tuesday at like noon to 1, people just like everybody was busy, like there was no one who had availability.
Right.
Not like we would have been hosting rehearsals at that time, but it just gives us a good indicator as to like, okay, maybe most people can't come at that time, so maybe looking more towards evenings or like during the day, like we did some Sunday and Saturday rehearsals.
Okay.
That kind of thing. What other questions do you have, like just about the auditioning process kind of for a stage manager, since we're not going to get into the other two parts?
What's the first thing that is looked for when let's say you have 5 people applying for the same part? What's the first thing that you want to see out of those 5 people to have them a person of interest?
So that's more of a directing question. I don't know if that can be answered from a stage management perspective.
Okay, here's a different question.
Okay.
Stage manager. We said briefly that's from point A to point B. Does that mean sound, breaks in conversation, breaks in parts, lighting? Is that all under the same umbrella?
Stage managers are kind of the facilitator, and like they ask the director something and then they will correlate that to like the lighting and sound, and then lighting and sound will give some info, and then that can be correlated through the stage manager back to the director. And usually that's done in like production meetings where like the stage manager is like the secretary or the note taker of like what's corresponded in that discussion to make sure things are all documented and adequately transpired to each area. So stage managers kind of have their hands in everything and nothing at the same time because they're their own little role, but at the same time they are like kind of the middleman between all the different areas, like technical, all the technical aspects, lighting, sound, scenic, also costumes, and just orienting all the other like additional crew and making sure that actors have like safety, and then directors are respecting actors' boundaries, and there's the safety boundaries with that kind of thing too.
So the actual night of the production, who kind of rules the roost? Who actually rolls the show?
So once you get into Tech Week, it's pretty much the stage managers calling everything. They're not only calling the show, but they're making sure everything sticks to schedule, making sure everyone gets to their places, and just the directors kind of absolve themselves from the picture. And that's when, especially when theater becomes more professional, directors will go on to direct other shows. It's the stage managers who will ultimately stick with that production and keep it running, just like all the Broadway shows that go on for years and years.
How about the question nobody likes? What happens when there's a squash in time, a line missed, a prop not in the right place? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, so like an example would be like if an actor gets sick, you mean? Kind of.
Or if he just forgets his line.
Well, if an actor forgets their line, they're taught how to just ad-lib, or the next actor just keeps going with the next line. You can't wait around for silence because then that breaks character. If a prop is forgotten, then the actors also just kind of have to deal with that. They need to be aware that their props are preset before they go on stage, and that's usually an assistant stage manager job, which is kind of a different role. But usually, like, the stage manager is not usually backstage. They're usually the ones up in the light booth or somewhere else backstage, not near where the action's going on, kind of calling the show sort of thing.
Because the good news there is the people in the chairs don't know that little part was gone.
Correct, unless it's a very obvious mess up, then there's that. But in the event of like if an actor does get sick, usually it's an assistant stage manager that can fill in. Sometimes a stage manager will fill in depending on if like assistant stage managers don't have like the right qualities. Like I know there's been some productions where stage managers will go on with the script and actually sing for an actor because they can sing, whereas like some other people can't. So there's just kind of like always having that fluidity and flexibility in regards to just making sure there's always keeping the cog going per se.
Are there backup people for all parts?
So you would, after a stage manager, you would have probably the assistant stage managers, and then after the assistant stage managers would be deck crew, but deck crew wouldn't have the familiarity with blocking notes, nor would they have a script on hand, so it would get a little bit more chaotic. beyond deck crew, I'm pretty sure that's kind of the pecking order in regards to
Okay.
that, because then you get into the different areas. Like lighting has their own little pecking room, same with sound and costumes and scenic, but
Okay.
stage management, it's like 1, 2, 3. Well, what do we do? So,
Yeah. Okay.
but do you have any other questions about kind of just the auditioning process? Because that was kind of a basic glimpse into what it is.
And we kind of covered a lot of stuff for me not knowing too much about this.
Yeah.
You
What
know?
kind of stuff stood out to you? If you could give like a 1-minute overview, do you think?
Well, first of all, it takes a lot of responsibility to put on a performance because you've got so many different people trying to carve this into their own little story, you know?
Yeah.
And the amount of time, I mean, it just seems like it'd be an endless amount of time that it would take to prepare for something like this. And not something you just throw together on a weekend and go, okay, let's go do this thing,
Yeah.
you know?
To give point of reference, from one show last semester, I put in about 170 hours of time over 6 weeks.
So just a quick run. That's good.
It's just a little more than a full-time job.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so, well, thank you for brief learning stage management, and maybe we'll get into a part 2 again at some point. But for right now, part 1's done. You at least can do auditions. You might need a lot more training, but you probably could handle auditions at this rate, maybe. I don't know.